The tomb is empty. Jesus did not ascend immediately to heaven. He stayed exactly 40 days in absolute silence, without multitudes following him, without performing public miracles, without giving speeches in the temple courts. And here arises the question that almost no one asks. Why 40 days? What was Jesus doing during that time that the church almost never explains? Being honest, this is the part that confronted me the most when studying this text. They were not 40 days of simple waiting. They were 40 days of a deliberate construction. Each appearance had a motive. Each conversation was designed. Each gesture was calculated. It had a profound purpose that is only understood when you know the language that God has used since Genesis. What you will discover in the coming minutes is not just ancient history. It is the map of how God prepares people before using them. And when you reach the end, you are going to understand why what Jesus did in silence matters more than any public miracle he ever performed. The number 40 is not a chronological accident in the Bible. It is deeply theological. It is the exact language that God uses to point out a single thing: inescapable preparation before a new era. The Bible records Moses climbing to the summit of Sinai. 40 days wrapped in impenetrable smoke before receiving the law. That was the foundational covenant that would define all Israel. Then, that same nation walked under the burning sun, 40 years biting the dust of the desert before entering the promised land. History also documents the crisis of the prophet Elijah. He walked 40 days to the cave of Mount Horeb before receiving his renewed commission. And Jesus himself faced the burning sand of Judea, 40 days of absolute fasting before beginning his public ministry. Stop for a moment. Every time 40 appears in the sacred text, what comes next changes the world completely. That is why Jesus chose to stay exactly 40 days with them. The Bible confirms this period of time in Acts chapter 1. Verse 3, he did not stay 38 days. He did not stay 42 days. The number itself is a shouted message in the deepest silence. Something completely new was about to begin on earth. And the first movement of that new era, no one expected it. Jerusalem, cold dawn in an orchard, with the dew still on the leaves. The first movement of the risen Jesus was coldly calculated. He could have appeared first to Peter, the designated leader. He could have gone to look for John, the beloved disciple. He could even have walked directly toward the palace of the Sanhedrin. Imagine the impact of that, forcing the entire religious system to recognize its error in public. But the Bible records in Mark chapter 16, verse 9, that he did not do any of that. He appeared first to Mary Magdalene, a woman crying alone in front of an open stone tomb. I did not understand it either at first. Why precisely her? In the Roman Jewish judicial system of that century, female testimony lacked validity. The first legal witness of the resurrection was invisible to the world. John chapter 20 describes it with an amazing level of detail. Everything changed radically with a single word. Jesus looked at her intently and pronounced her name, Mary. In that fraction of a second, she recognized him. The word she used to respond was Rabboni. But Rabboni does not simply mean a common teacher. In the ancient Aramaic language, the possessive suffix I transforms the word completely. It means directly my teacher, not just any teacher in Israel, hers. Stop for a moment. This is pure intimacy, not a distant religious title. She ran out of that orchard with her heart beating at 1,000 per hour. Mary ran to tell them. The disciples listened to her and did not believe. The Greek word that Mark uses is not simply to doubt. The word is epistason. That means an active rejection, a conscious dismissal of the information. They spent 3.5 years walking alongside Jesus. They heard his prophecies about his own imminent resurrection, and when the exact moment arrived, they did not believe it. But that is not moral weakness. It is humanity. The mind cannot accept what it has no category to process. An individual bodily resurrection in the midst of human history was unheard of. No known Jewish theology contemplated such a thing before the final judgment. Neither the Pharisaic, nor the Sadducean, nor the Essene. What Mary affirmed was literally unthinkable. Acts chapter 23 proves it, because God allowed his own closest witnesses to doubt first. What did Jesus know about doubt that we still do not understand? That is exactly what the following movements reveal. The same Sunday of the resurrection, the afternoon sun began to warm the dense dust of the rocky road toward Emmaus. 11 kilometers of distance separated the great city of Jerusalem from a small village, and 2 men walked it with their shoulders completely slumped, dragging their feet. One of them has a name clearly recorded in biblical history: Cleopas. The other disciple has no name in the text, and that empty space is a deliberate design left on purpose for whoever listens to this story today. A complete stranger joins them in the dust of the road, adjusting to their same sad rhythm, and asks them a simple question. Cleopas looks at him straight on, stops his march, and responds with deep incredulity. Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know what happened? The Bible records that everyone in the city was vibrating with the news because the public crucifixion had been the absolute event of the year, and they tell the tragedy using a verb tense that destroys the soul. We hoped that he was the one who was to redeem Israel. Past tense, a finished sentence. Because for them, all their hope had definitively died on a Roman cross. Then, the stranger does something extraordinary. He does not embrace them. He does not comfort them with empty phrases saying that everything will be fine. He calls them foolish with an undeniable tenderness, but in a completely direct way, and begins to speak to them. Beginning from the prophet Moses and following through all the ancient prophets, he declared to them in all the scriptures what was said concerning him. It was 3 hours of relentless walking, covering the entire Pentateuch, breaking down each prophetic scroll. Many scholars agree, based on the research of Alfred Edersheim, that there existed more than 456 passages of the Old Testament that the rabbis of the first century recognized as messianic. Stop for a moment. Jesus went through absolutely all of them on that journey. He did not walk with an open parchment in his hand. He did it from memory, from within, because he himself was the central theme. Finally, they arrive at the village of Emmaus, and the stranger makes as if to go further, but they insist fervently. Stay with us. The Bible confirms that at the table, when he takes the bread, blesses it, and breaks it, in that same gesture. Their eyes are opened, and he disappears. He disappears from their sight in a second. Being honest, this is the part of the text that I reread the most times while preparing this study. No one knows for sure, but Cleopas was not going to the village of Emmaus for a visit. He was returning definitively. He was returning to his previous life, fleeing from pain. He was returning to what he was before knowing Jesus. 11 kilometers of dust is a long walk of 3 hours. When one leaves Jerusalem with shoulders completely slumped, walking after the tragic death of whom you believed was the Messiah, those 11 solitary kilometers are more than enough time to make a decision in your mind. And the decision was simple. This is over. There is absolutely nothing here for me anymore in this city. And what no one talks about from this part is how God acted. Jesus did not stop them by force before they left Jerusalem. He did not shout at them from the door of the tomb to save them the trauma. He simply let them walk away from the promise. He let them reach as far as touching their deepest darkness on that journey. And then, Exactly at that point of absolute breaking, Luke chapter 24 confirms that he caught up with them. He walked the same path of disappointment. Alongside them, he introduced himself into the very center of their human frustration. God is not afraid of it, of your walks back when you feel that hope died. That same night, the story moves to another completely different scenario. It is the same Sunday night, and the air smells of tension. The disciples are locked in, breathing a paralyzing fear. The wooden doors are closed tightly from the inside. John chapter 20 records that Jesus appears suddenly in the midst of them, without knocking on the main door, without entering through an open window. He is simply there. He looks at them and says to them firmly, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I also send you." And then he makes a movement that the Apostle John describes with a single word in Greek. The word is enephysesin. It means literally that he breathed on them. Stop for a moment. That specific word enephysesin appears only twice in the entire Bible in Greek. It appears here in this room and in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. In the Septuagint. That was the exact moment when God breathed the breath of life into Adam. The exact same word used on purpose. John chose it in a completely deliberate way. The Bible confirms that Jesus was not giving simple administrative instructions. He was executing a second creation in real time. The first man formed from the dust received physical breath to live. These defeated men receive in that instant spiritual breath. They receive a direct divine capacity to fulfill what no human effort can ever fulfill. Thomas was not there when Jesus appeared that night. The disciples looked for him. They told him everything excitedly, and he responded with a brutal scientific precision. "I need to see the marks in his hands. I need to touch those wounds with my own fingers. Without that physical proof, I simply do not believe." The tension grew during 8 long days. The doors were locked. Again, Jesus appears suddenly in the same room and walks directly toward Thomas. Looking him in the eyes, he repeats exactly his own words of doubt. The finger, the hands, the hand in the side. Jesus had been listening to that private conversation 8 days before. He knew absolutely everything. And in reality, it was the complete opposite of a punishment. He did not rebuke Thomas for demanding proof. He gave him exactly what he had asked for. The man who demanded the greatest evidence pronounced the deepest confession of faith of all the Gospels. And Jesus accepted it without correcting him. That contradiction says something about God that most never considered. And the Sea of Galilee was completely dark in the early morning. And the cold air hit the faces of the 7 men in the boat. They had spent the whole night casting the nets into the dark water, but they caught absolutely nothing. At the break of dawn, a firm voice resonated from the shore, saying, "Cast the net on the right side." They do it by inertia and lift exactly 153 heavy fish. And yet, the net did not break. John, looking through the morning mist, whispers with awe, "It is the Lord." Peter does not think about it for a second. He throws himself into the freezing water and swims desperately toward the sandy shore. When they arrive soaked, there is a fire lit that crackles softly with roasted fish and freshly prepared bread. Jesus was already waiting for them patiently, not with severe reproaches for having fled, but with a hot breakfast for their tired bodies. After breakfast, in the silence of the morning, Jesus turns directly toward Peter and begins an intimate conversation that has the exact structure of an ancient ritual of restoration. The Bible shows that in Greek, Jesus uses 2 completely different words to speak of love. First question, "Do you love me?" Using the word agapes, which means an unconditional, divine, and absolute love. Peter, remembering his own recent failure, responds with philo, a fraternal, purely affectionate, and human love. He does not dare to offer more than that. Second question. Jesus repeats the exact same word, and Peter responds in the same limited way. Third question. Jesus descends to his level and uses Peter's own word, phileos me. Do you appreciate me deeply? The Bible says that Peter was grieved by this third question. Why? Because he understood perfectly what was happening. At that exact moment, there were 3 specific questions and 3 painful answers. 3 denials erased, one by one, in the same language in which they occurred, aloud in front of other men, beside the burning fire. The last time Peter was trembling beside a fire, he denied Jesus 3 times in a row. This time, beside another comforting fire, he affirms it with tears 3 times. Many scholars believe, based on the Jewish culture of honor and shame, that a public offense of 3 acts required an identical public restoration. Jesus did not magically invent this number. He took it from the cultural protocol that Peter knew down to his bones. The restoration was designed millimetrically so that Peter would understand it in silence, without anyone having to explain it to him. I did not understand the gigantic weight of this data, either the first time I read it in the Bible. The Apostle Paul writes a public document in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 6. This occurred only 22 to 25 years after the historical resurrection of Jesus. He affirms categorically that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at the same time, and then adds a phrase that is an open challenge. Of whom many remain alive still. Mistar, that small legal detail inserted in the text, changes absolutely the whole landscape for us. Paul is not appealing blindly to the religious faith of those who read his letter. The Bible confirms that he is appealing directly to historical verification. Basically, he is telling them, you do not have to believe me. Go and ask the witnesses who are still alive. In the year 55 after Christ, the eyewitnesses of the resurrection were verifiable. They were physical people locatable in the geography of the empire, and completely interrogable by any skeptic. 500 people experiencing exactly the same thing simultaneously in one place. Most scholars agree that collective hallucinations do not exist in psychiatric literature. Hallucinations are, by pure scientific definition, strictly individual experiences in the brain and not shared. What Paul describes in this letter to the Corinthians is not mysticism nor an ancient myth. It is the calculated language of a man who knows that his claim can be proven this very day. The last day of the 40 arrived. The final setting was the Mount of Olives, an elevation located east of Jerusalem, less than 1 kilometer from its imposing walls. The Bible records in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, that there Jesus speaks for the last time. He delivers to them the most precise expansion strategy recorded in all the New Testament. They were to begin in Jerusalem, advance through all Judea, cross into Samaria, and reach to the uttermost part of the earth. And then, while they listened, he was lifted up from the ground. A dense cloud received him and hid him from their sight. His disciples stood ecstatic with their eyes completely fixed on the sky. The account of Acts confirms that 2 angels appeared suddenly by their side. They told them a single thing that would define the future of the world. This same Jesus will return in exactly the same way in which you saw him go. Mart, stop for a moment and think about the geography of this event. Acts chapter 1, verse 12 confirms that this occurred specifically on the Mount of Olives. But Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4, a text written 500 years before, contains a shocking revelation. That prophecy assures that when the Messiah returns, His feet will stand exactly upon that same mount. Jesus did not choose this place by accident or convenience. He departed physically from the same coordinates where the Bible says he will return. The Ascension and the Second Coming share the exact same point on the biblical map: 40 uninterrupted days, 7 carefully documented appearances, a second creation executed behind closed doors, an intense biblical study of 3 hours walking along a dusty path, a private and painful restoration beside a fire on the beach, 500 eyewitnesses gathered at the same time, and an unbreakable promise engraved forever in the literal geography of a mountain. All this is what the Gospels record as true. But here is a detail that changes the perspective completely. Jesus did not spend those 40 crucial days performing great public miracles to impress the masses. He chose to spend that valuable time with people who were deeply broken. He sat patiently with men who had fled, terrified on the darkest night. He walked with those who had denied knowing him, with those who doubted everything, with those who walked back to their previous life, feeling that they had lost. Luke chapter 24 and John chapter 21 show that he reached each one exactly where they were and not where they were supposed to be. And here is exactly where this story reaches you. This is not a simple ancient tale from 2,000 years ago. The real question is not whether all these historical events actually occurred in Judea. The question you must ask yourself is, in which of all these people do you recognize yourself today? Are you like Mary Magdalene, crying inconsolably in front of something you thought lost, without knowing that in reality it was already restored by God? Are you, perhaps like Cleopas, walking back to your old life with your shoulders slumped simply because the hope you had died on the road? Are you living like Peter, carrying in silence a heavy denial that you honestly believe no longer has any possible repair? Or are you acting like Thomas, with real questions in your mind, demanding tangible evidence to be able to believe and feeling a deep fear that that same doubt will disqualify you forever? Jesus looked for them and found them all in their most vulnerable moment, without any exception. He did not correct them first with a moral speech, nor did he demand perfection before approaching. He arrived softly, with a fire lit in the cold, with fish prepared for their hunger, and with a question designed exactly to heal the specific wound that each one carried in the soul. If in any of these characters you recognized yourself today, write below which one: Mary, Cleopas, Peter, Thomas. You do not have to explain anything else. Just write it. I read each one. The disciples stood ecstatic, with their eyes glued to the sky, waiting for something else. The angels had to interrupt that moment with a direct and unexpected question. Why do you keep looking up? The Bible confirms in Acts chapter 1 that this was not a divine rebuke. It was a clear strategic direction for the immediate future. Heaven is no longer the place where the story occurs, the story of redemption. Now it is on the earth and in their hands. But the story does not end there. The Ascension was by no means a traumatic abandonment for the 11. It was a massive transfer of authority for the whole world. Jesus had told them a truth that at first sounded disconcerting. It is better for you that I go away definitively, because if I do not go, the Comforter will not come to you. The Bible records in John chapter 16 that the physical departure was the absolute condition to receive the spiritual power. What Jesus built in those 40 days in complete silence changes absolutely everything. He left Mary Magdalene totally restored in an orchard. He left Cleopas with his eyes wide open at a table. He left Peter commissioned and forgiven in front of a fire. He left Thomas confessing his deity without any remaining doubt, and left 500 witnesses completely ready to speak the truth. That group of people that before was broken was now the perfect launch team. They were about to initiate the greatest mission in all of human history. Jesus looked at them on that mount and pronounced the words that sustain the universe. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. The Bible confirms in Matthew chapter 28 that the Greek word used here does not mean believers, and neither is it simple converts. The word is matheteusate. It means literally make disciples who are totally committed. It is about people who live in a radically different way. They live differently because they are learning daily from someone very specific. Rome fell with all its overwhelming military power. Babylonia disappeared under the desert sand. The immense Persian Empire vanished completely. The feared Mongol Empire dissolved in history. The British Empire eventually withdrew from its immense territories. The curious thing is the persistence of this single order. The commission that 11 frightened men received on an isolated Mount of Galilee remains intact. The evidence of the United Bible Societies confirms something amazing. This order remains alive and active this very day. In 2026, it is operating in more than 7,000 distinct languages. It expanded vigorously on every inhabited continent of the earth. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. The Bible documents this unalterable promise in Matthew chapter 28. He did not promise to make occasional visits when things were good. He promised a continuous and unbreakable presence by your side. It is the only promise in human history that has no expiration date. They were 40 days that challenge all our human logic about how success truly works. The Bible confirms in Acts chapter 1 that they transpired without anxious multitudes, without great signs crossing the sky, and without triumphant public declarations before the fearsome Sanhedrin. Jesus did not make any dazzling appearance before Pontius Pilate to force him to force an official recognition of the empire. Jesus had the absolute power to do all that in a single instant. And yet, he deliberately chose not to do it. Instead, the accounts of John and Luke show us that he chose the silence of a closed garden where a woman wept inconsolably. He chose to walk patiently along a dusty path where 2 exhausted men surrendered to life. He chose to enter a dark room closed with a latch of fear. And he chose a solitary beach with 7 frustrated fishermen who had no catch. He chose to light a fire with his own hands, preparing fish and bread for a man who desperately needed to be asked 3 times if he loved him. No one knows for sure. But sometimes the immense power of God does not move on the great illuminated stages that we all expect. Sometimes that same power moves silently in the 11 long and sad kilometers of your whole life. It moves in the freezing dawn when your net is completely empty and your strength is exhausted. It moves in that question that someone asks you beside the fire. A question that seems too simple for the gigantic weight you carry. But that touches exactly what needed to be touched. The 40 days ended on that mount, and the ascension occurred before their eyes. But the divine pattern never changed. The same compassionate Jesus who looked for Mary Magdalene in a solitary garden is the same one who intentionally looks for you today. The one who walked those 11 kilometers with Cleopas, without revealing immediately who he was, waiting patiently until the darkness was deep enough, is the same one who walks with you right now on that path where your hope died. He did not arrive in their lives when everything was resolved and fine. He arrived exactly at the lowest point of their despair, because he always does it that way. What Jesus did in silence during those 40 days was not simply waiting to go to heaven. It was building unbreakable foundations. And what he built in those shattered hearts remains firmly standing to this day.